accueillir à cette conférence. Je m'appelle Frédéric Gagnon. Je suis titulaire de la chaire Raoul-Dandurand, directeur de l'Observatoire sur les États-Unis au sein de cette même chaire et professeur au Département de sciences politiques. Tout ça se trouve à l'Université du Québec à Montréal. Est-ce que vous la connaissez? Je sais que certains et certaines la connaissent parce qu'il y a des étudiants et étudiantes de mes cours de bac et de maîtrise. Où sont-ils ce matin? Je vois quelques personnes là-bas. Mais merci d'être là. C'est un grand plaisir de vous accueillir à ce colloque de l'Observatoire sur les États-Unis intitulé « Trump, l'an 1 ». Inauguré le 3 juin 2002 pour mieux comprendre le comportement des États-Unis sur la scène internationale, les élections américaines également, notre observatoire, l'Observatoire sur les États-Unis, vise par ses recherches, ses publications et ses interventions médiatiques à mobiliser les connaissances et à favoriser la compréhension des réalités américaines. L'Observatoire compte aujourd'hui une dizaine de chercheurs en résidence. Vous en rencontrerez quelques-uns ici aujourd'hui. Vous connaissez sans doute Elisabeth Vallet. Vous rencontrerez Charles-Philippe David tout à l'heure si vous ne le connaissez pas déjà. Il y a Karine Prémont qui sourit juste là et qui s'attendait peut-être à ce que je la nomme parce que je le fais toujours pour la mettre un petit peu mal à l'aise. Et il y a aussi une trentaine de membres associés à cet observatoire provenant du Québec, du Canada, des États-Unis et d'Europe. Donc, nos recherches portent sur trois grands axes: la politique étrangère des États-Unis, la politique intérieure des États-Unis et également les relations entre le Canada, Québec et les États-Unis. A year ago, on election night in the U.S., l'Observatoire sur les États-Unis gathered 300 people at the Société des Arts Technologiques here in Montreal for an election night party that ended with a result that took almost everybody by surprise. Donald Trump proved many of our theories wrong and beat Hillary Clinton despite his unconventional campaigning style, inexistent governing experience, and limited support among members of his party. Experts and scholars are just starting to understand why Trump won the presidency, but at least two factors seem to have played a role in the most surprising electoral outcome in U.S. history since Dewey defeats Truman in 1948. On one hand, Trump seemed to have reshuffled Republican and Democratic electoral coalitions with his protectionist views on trade. His opposition to trade deals, such as the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the North American Free Trade Agreement, we will talk about this during the fourth panel, enabled Trump to win just enough votes in the Great Lakes region to secure the presidency. During his campaign, Trump promised to build a wall between the United States and Mexico. We'll talk about this during the third panel today. But he needed to break down another wall to win the White House in 2016, a blue wall composed of 18 states plus the District of Columbia that had tilted Democratic since 1992. And Trump succeeded. If you look at the electoral map in 2016, you can see that he won Pennsylvania by 44,000 votes, Michigan by 11,000 votes, and Wisconsin by 23,000 votes. So these three states, and many others, but these three states in particular, ultimately handled Trump the presidency, which means that Hillary Clinton was only 80,000 votes short of becoming the first Président des États-Unis d'Amérique. A second factor that accounts for Trump's victory is that in the end, it seems like this election was about change and more about change than the status quo. During the Democratic National Convention in the summer of 2016, Democrats insisted that the U.S. economy was in great shape since unemployment was under 5% at the time. A few days before, though, during their own national convention, Republicans argued that Americans felt that the country was heading in the wrong direction. So these two competing visions between Democrats who said, look at the facts, and Republicans who asked, how are you feeling, ultimately favored Donald Trump. On the economy, the problem for many was not that they did not have a job. The problem was that the jobs created during the Obama presidency were seen as sometimes not as good as the ones that existed before, the economic crisis, for instance. So for these same electors, the problem with Hillary Clinton was not that she was not ready to be president. The problem was that she did not depart from the recipes they felt was preventing them from living the American dream: open borders, free trade, etc. So in this electoral year where resentment against political and economic elites was at its highest in recent history, Trump's assertion that Clinton had experience but bad experience resonated more with the electorate than what pundits, experts, scholars, and professors had expected. So these are some of the reasons why almost nobody saw it coming. And those are some of the reasons why I didn't see it coming either. Now, Trump is in the White House, and the goal of this conference is to assess the results of his first 10 months in office in 4 areas. The first panel will focus on foreign policy. The second panel on the president's relationship with actors that have the power to check and balance his actions, the media and the courts. The third panel will touch on the issue of borders and immigration, a very important issue in Trump's time. And the last panel will focus on Canada-Quebec-US relations. And at a time where only 22% of Canadians have confidence in Trump to do the right thing, and where the percentage of Canadians who see the U.S. favorably recently dropped to 43%, down from 65% in 2016. By the way, it's the first time in recent history that fewer than half of Canadians express a positive view of the U.S. I know that one of the big questions that the audience will want to ask today is, should we be optimistic or pessimistic about the rest of Trump's presidency and about the future? Other questions that will probably arise today during the panels are the following. How can we define Donald Trump's foreign policy doctrine? Tom, Ralph? We'll ask you this question, I guess. Okay, we'll ask Tom. What will he do in North Korea, in Iran, in Syria? What does Trump's war with the media mean for U.S. democracy? How will Trump's rhetoric regarding the wall between Mexico and the United States, or both sides in Charlottesville, affect race relations in the short and long term? What is the future of NAFTA and of the fight against global warming when the U.S. president respectively called these the worst trade deal in history and an invention of China to make U.S. manufacturing non-competitive? So before we kick things off with our first panel on Trump's foreign policy, I would like to thank a few partners without which this conference could have not been possible. J'aimerais remercier en premier lieu notre principal partenaire, le ministère des Relations internationales et de la francophonie du Québec, le ministère dont vous pourrez rencontrer certains de ses représentants aujourd'hui. Merci d'être là. Appuie l'Observatoire et la Chaire Raoul-Dandurand depuis ses débuts, mais l'Observatoire sur les États-Unis depuis 2002 en particulier, et contribue, on doit le dire, de manière inestimable à l'accomplissement de nos missions de recherche. Et le colloque d'aujourd'hui n'aurait pas pu être possible sans l'appui du ministère, et plusieurs de nos activités d'ailleurs. Je tiens aussi à remercier le Conseil de recherche en sciences humaines du Canada et la Faculté de sciences politiques et de droit, 2 autres partenaires très importants aujourd'hui. Je vais remercier aussi tout de suite, mais je vais le refaire en conclusion, en les nommant chacune, mais je ne le ferai pas tout de suite, ce sera un peu fastidieux parce que ce colloque-là est vraiment le produit d'un travail d'équipe incroyable. Mais tout de suite, je remercie les membres de l'équipe de la Chaire Raoul-Dandurand pour leur contribution à l'organisation de ce colloque. C'est un travail d'équipe, vous le verrez, et vous les verrez aujourd'hui. Je pense qu'ils ont des petits macarons qui vous permettent de bien les reconnaître. Vous voyez Vincent Boucher, là, à la porte, entre autres, c'est un bon exemple. Il a son petit macaron, il est membre de la Chaire Raoul-Dandurand. C'est comme ça qu'on les reconnaît. Donc, je vous souhaite une excellente journée. Certaines présentations seront en anglais. Il est toutefois possible de poser vos questions en français. Il y aura des périodes de questions prévues à cet effet. 2 micros en salle vous permettront de poser vos questions. Si vous voulez les poser en français, c'est possible de le faire. Nos présidents, présidentes de séance pourront traduire ou quelqu'un pourra traduire. Vous pouvez aussi utiliser, si vous êtes abonné à Twitter, on sait que le président Trump l'est, et maintenant vous avez encore plus de caractères pour vous exprimer sur Twitter. Donc, on pourra en profiter aujourd'hui et échanger, si vous le souhaitez, sur Twitter, si vous êtes membre de Twitter, en recourant au mot-clic Trump 1. Non, c'est ça, c'est à l'écran, c'est simple. Donc, je vous souhaite une bonne journée et sans plus tarder, j'inviterai Charles-Philippe David, mon collègue et ami de toujours, professeur au Département de sciences politiques à l'UQAM, fondateur de la Chaire Raoul-Dandurand, il y a plus de 20 ans maintenant, président de l'Observatoire sur les États-Unis de la Chaire Raoul-Dandurand, père d'un magnifique garçon d'une dizaine d'années. Ça, je pourrais lire le CV jusqu'à la fin de la journée. C'est filmé, c'est sur Facebook Live. Bonjour. Merci, Charles-Philippe, d'être là. Je te souhaite un bon colloque.
Hey,
et puis, tu nous commences avec le premier atelier. Ça va?
Right. Yeah,
excellent.
Yeah, sure,
Merci beaucoup. Bonne journée à tous et à toutes.
Bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue. On va commencer, comme on dit, sur les chapeaux de roue avec un premier atelier sur la politique étrangère américaine. Ça devrait nous mettre en forme pour la journée, ça. Je salue la présence des étudiantes et des étudiants du cours de politique extérieure des États-Unis qui sont ici présents. Je pense qu'ils, comme tous les autres, comme tout le monde, comme moi, je crois qu'on va être très, très bien servis. And now I'm going to switch into English. Good morning. My name is Captain Charles-Philippe David. I am the captain of a starship called Unruly. Unruly American Foreign Policy, which is the title of our panel this morning. These are, by the way, my crew members. Their mission is to explore new ways, to seek out new understandings, and to boldly go where no analysts have gone before in understanding Donald Trump. Thank you. That's kind, even if you don't think it's that great. Remember that my mission is to teach. It's not to act. But, with Trump, we have to change our ways. We have to adapt. We have to be different. We have to be abnormal a little bit. So we're going to talk about the unruly foreign policy of Donald Trump. I'm going to talk about that tomorrow, so gosh, I'll be listening to what you have to say. I'm sure that, as Frédéric mentioned, you will try to make sense, decipher. Is there some coherence or total incoherence in the objectives that are followed by the Trump administration? Is unpredictability the normal in his foreign policy? I'm sure that you guys and as well Melissa will talk about a little bit, I suppose, the people who are around that very, very special man, the advisors, the advising system, talk about the the checks and balances and how anybody can check if there need there is anything about American foreign policy. Frédéric mentioned a doctrine. Is there one word or several words or some orientation that would explain what this administration is all about? What's in store for the future? My gosh, when I say that we're going intergalactic, we just don't know where we're going, I suppose. So, but we have the best crew. We have the best crew on board, and we're very, very, very flattered to have them back. Most of them, 2/3 of them, are personal friends. 1/3 of them I get finally to know personally today, and it's not because we haven't tried in the past to invite him often to come to Montreal. So, by order of presentation, the man that I will get to know personally like you today, Thomas Preston, distinguished professor of political science at Washington State University. As Ralph, so you guys must know each other. Okay. It's good to know that your crew, I get to know the crew. Both have their PhDs from Ohio State University, a prestigious university, especially in American foreign policy. Lots of work done there, especially with their supervisors. Tom is a specialist in security policy, foreign affairs, and that's important here. That is so ever important here. Did I say that's important? Political psychology. Boy, do we need you. In 2003, he was awarded the prestigious William Mullen Excellence in Teaching Award by Washington State University, College of Liberal Arts. He was named the Washington State University Faculty Innovator by university in 2007, and he's also received a Fulbright Scholarship latest in 2010. And I will conclude on this, because the bios here could take the whole panel, right? His books, he has 3 very, very important books. One of them, which my students, by the way, Tom, have to read parts of it, the models about the Sentinel, the Mavericks, and so on, to make sense of the presidential style. Very, very, very useful. The book is called The President and His Inner Circle Leadership Style and the Advisory Process in Foreign Affairs. We have one of the best specialists on decision-making right here. Published at Columbia University Press in 2001. He also has a book called Pandora's Trap, Presidential Decision-Making and Blame Avoidance in Vietnam and Iraq at Rowman and Littlefield in 2011. And he's also co-author of Introduction to Political Psychology, published at Taylor and Francis, first edition 2010, second edition 2015. Welcome aboard, Tom. Second, not the least, good friend, good personal friend, Melissa Willard-Foster. She's the professor of international relations and international security at the University of Vermont at Burlington, where I had a great honor to spend a semester there and attend her great seminars. She has her PhD from another university whom we're very fond with, is UCLA, University of California at Los Angeles. Melissa's interest centers on international conflict and cooperation. She's especially interested in how domestic political pressures can lead states into wars that they might otherwise avoid. What a relevant question in the last 15 years. Her current book project, and I think that a book will be coming out very soon, I'm eager to hear what the latest news are about that, seeks to explain why major powers overthrow foreign governments. Welcome aboard, Melissa. Melissa will talk, I think, about the promises of Donald Trump, the campaign of Donald Trump, right? And what's happening today with, say, the results of that campaign and what's been done or not done in American foreign policy. So a sort of comparative analysis. And Tom will delve, of course, in decision-making, as you think you'd guessed from my presentation. Last, not the least, another very good friend, who has become a very good friend lately. He's been here at UQAM once before, Ralph Carter. He's a full professor at Texas Christian University. He's also had, as I said, I mentioned his PhD from Ohio State University. As I said, he's the professor. He teaches international courses in political science and international politics as a professor at TCU. He, of course, is the specialist of American foreign policy, especially viewed from the congressional perspective. He has published 5 books, over 40 scientific articles. Let me mention Essentials of U.S. Foreign Policy Making in 2015, widely used. Contemporary Cases in U.S. Foreign Policy from Terrorism to Trade, 5th edition in 2014. And with his good friend, and also another good friend of ours, James Scott, and Cooper Drury as well. He's published an essay on foreign policy analysis. He has also, and I conclude on this, been named one of the best professors by the Texas Guide to Texas University. So I'd like to attend one of his classes as well. So welcome aboard, the 3 of you. I could go at length presenting you. I think we'll have a very great panel on making sense of Trump's unruly foreign policy. So I think Tom goes first. You can stay there or come up here. You just feel like you want to do it. Thank you very much.
Is this the clicker for that, or should work? Okay. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone, and I'm glad I'm on the away team. I do not have a red shirt on this away team, so that is a good thing I have heard on Star Trek. In talking about President Trump's personality and leadership style and the effects it's likely going to have on foreign affairs and foreign policy making this morning, I will be drawing both on my own research on presidential style, as well as a personality profile of Trump that a colleague of mine, Margaret Herman, and I have done, and she's at Syracuse University using leadership trait analysis. There we are. Okay. And LTA is basically a content analysis technique that uses individuals' language during spontaneous interviews, Q&As, things of that nature, to code for individual characteristics like the need for power, complexity, distrust, etc. And it's a computer coding expert system, so you can code enormous amounts of material. We've used this technique to over the past 20 years to develop a data set of over 600 world leaders in both academic and government settings. So, and my leadership style framework that's been laid out in a couple of my previous books builds upon this LTA literature, adds notions of leader experience and expertise, and provides predictions regarding likely leadership styles and uses of advisors by leaders. So when I talk about characteristics of President Trump, I'm really addressing, kind of comparing him with this larger data set of world leaders. So what does the Trump profile look like if we're going to assess him psychologically? Well, firstly, he has a high need for control. He has a high internal locus of control. In other words, he believes he can control events, that he can control things, that the world doesn't control him. And he has a moderate to high need for power. He also has a low complexity, conceptual complexity. He's very black and white, absolute in the way he sees the world. He has an extremely high distrust of others. In fact, when you look at compared to other world leaders, he's 3 full standard deviations above the norm in distrust of others. Probably not that much of a surprise. Low self-confidence, given how prickly he is. That is not shocking. High need for affiliation, low task orientation. The idea that he's really much more interested in being loved and adored and having positive things said rather than accomplishing anything in terms of tasks. So what does this actually mean? Firstly, the high need for control. Now, Trump has that high need for control, and what that means usually with presidents is that, and what we expect to see with Trump, is that he will tend to directly challenge constraints in the environment due to the belief that he can control his own destiny. However, this lack of governing experience and policy knowledge, he doesn't have any, coupled with an insular advisory system, is likely to lead to serious political miscalculations and policy fiascos. So if we're looking ahead into the future, that is certainly something we would look to. We're actually seeing lots of examples of already, unfortunately. And primarily because he thinks he can control events. He believes that he's going to be able to guide the way. Such leaders tend to micromanage on select issues that they have strong idiosyncratic views about, and they become frustrated and pushy if they appear to lose control, and they frequently lash out at opponents. It's a very much an ends justifies the means, Machiavellian sort of leadership style. In terms of policy formulation, decision-making in foreign affairs, we would certainly expect to see it more tightly centralized within a close White House inner circle. We've certainly seemed to see that. Trump has a preference for direct control over final decisions, but limited need for personal involvement throughout the policy process. He'll set general policy guidelines, but delegates most policy formulation and implementation to subordinates whose views strongly influence his own final decisions. So when you look at the president and you look at what the White House is doing in terms of foreign affairs, really you look whoever inhabits Trump's close inner circle of advisors matters enormously in terms of policy decisions. And that inner circle of loyal advisors who have Trump's ear will be highly influential. He also has low complexity. Now, complexity is basically the degree to which you differentiate your environment. Do you see everything in black and white absolute terms, or do you see shades of gray? It is not IQ. Okay, it has nothing to do with IQ. It is purely how much you differentiate the environment. Now, Trump is very low in complexity, and certainly, I mean, he's lower than Reagan was, which is, which you know was our standard, gold standard there for a while. Trump is very low in complexity and views the world in that very black and white. He just doesn't see shades of gray. It's us and them. You're right or wrong, etc. Low complexity leaders tend to have very closed information advisory systems. They tend to only seek advice from like-minded advisors, and they tend to gather only information that supports their pre-existing views. They're largely insensitive to external constraints on policymaking. You know, they challenge constraints. I like to explain it to my graduate students as, imagine you either have your antennae up and you're monitoring the environment around you, or you have your antennae down and you're not picking up on the nature of the actual environment. That is Trump. The antennae are down. Advisors will be selected based on loyalty and ideological fit over expertise and competence. Dissent will be seen as disloyalty for a president like this. Certainly many of his cabinet picks show this. I mean, this focus on loyalty over expertise and competence. Ben Carson at HUD, Rick Perry at Energy, DeVos at Education, Pompeo at CIA, Pruitt at EPA, Bannon and Flynn on the NSC to begin with. Clearly not being picked on competence. And this is a problem when you think about how this can come back to haunt you. Your leadership style sets you up to fail sometimes in crisis situations. Think about Brown heading FEMA under W. Bush. He was appointed based on loyalty, another low complexity president. You know, such leaders do not value different views or perspectives, and they tend to lash out at those offering advice or information challenging existing views. And we see this quite a bit with Trump, certainly his attacks on the media, the judiciary, anyone that challenges his facts or version of events. He's incredibly hyper-defensive in protecting his personal reality bubble. You know, all the tweet storm attacks on pretty much everyone, from NFL players to whoever else comes across his path. Low complexity leaders also tend to exhibit rapid, impulsive decision-making based on little or no information search. And we see this, this does cause an immense problem for maintaining policy consistency, and we see the policy flipping all over the place already throughout this administration. Lots of self-wounding from shooting at the hip. And very much, I mean, in some respects, this is similar to Truman, because people, I've interviewed people that work for Harry Truman, and they said, you could get, go into Truman's office in 5 minutes and get 15 different decisions. Faster than anybody they'd ever met. And the problem is the next person could also come in and get 15 more decisions, some of which were contradictory to the ones he'd just made, because they weren't being staffed out. There wasn't anybody controlling who was just going in there. Trump had exactly the same problem. There was no control, and he was just kind of agreeing with whoever he talked to last. You see a lot of fast executive orders being made with no staffing prior to the immigration order. Improvised phone calls to world leaders. We had all sorts of examples of this behavior already. The antennae down means that with that limited search for information or feedback, you don't get the information you need. I mean, he is basically, John Kennedy, if we were in a meeting and you were my advisors and I was Jack Kennedy, if you were all agreeing with me, I would be uncomfortable. Even during the Cuban Missile Crisis, John Kennedy, his initial preference was airstrike. He red-teamed blockade. You would never see this with Donald Trump. I mean, Trump is going to want to hear the information. Agree. If everybody's agreeing with him, he's happy about that. Trump is only big picture, usually. He's bored by details or spending any time on depth or details. He doesn't value the Presidential Daily Brief, the PDB, briefings from the intelligence community, doesn't read much at all, relies on social media and television for his information, and only wants the most superficial presentations of information from staff. Colleagues of mine that actually are involved in the PDB for Trump, the directive has come down, do not give him any more than 1 page a half page to a page, and lots of pictures, because he likes pictures. And this is certainly problematic because it means you get only the most superficial presentation of information, and that's often what he goes with. Trump has famously said he doesn't need the CIA briefings because he's smart. As a result, such leaders do not learn fast, have difficulty recognizing changing situations, and have low adaptability to changing policy environments. Running into problems like LBJ had in Vietnam, Bush had in Iraq. They're also quite low in self-monitoring. They don't change depending on the audience they're talking to. Trump tends to be Trump, regardless of who he's talking to, which means he ends up being tone deaf in front of a lot of audiences, which is problematic. And also, with these sorts of leaders, we expect him to select people that are similar to himself. We call it the doppelganger effect. And of course, with Trump, he's picking people without government experience, for the most part, mostly with business backgrounds. And this kind of sets him up in difference from previous low-complexity presidents who've had, like Reagan, W. Bush, Truman, LBJ, in that at least he had more experience. They had at least a little bit more experienced people around them. Trump really does not very much. And he devalues traditional expertise. And because of that, I think there's dangers of groupthink much more likely to happen with a president like this. Also when you think about, aside from the low complexity, he has absolutely no prior foreign policy or governmental experience, which is unique among past U.S. presidents who either had often, even if they weren't political people, they had extensive military backgrounds or something of that nature. As a result, what we see here is that Trump's leadership style is pretty much the same whether you're talking about foreign policy or domestic policy. He has no background expertise in either one of these, which is quite rare. So he's going to be very dependent upon expert advisors to flesh out the details of policy, and because he has no background to help him do that on his own. And he's often going to have trouble populating his inner circle with true experts because he doesn't appreciate expertise. So he ends up having what I call pseudo-experts around him, people who he believes are expert, even if you and I objectively might not agree with that. And the problem here is you can point to people like Mattis and McMaster and other around Trump and say, well, there's some expertise there. But just because they're there doesn't mean they have the president's ear and he's listening to them. And so, I would certainly argue that Trump probably views Fox and Friends as equally expert as Mattis. And so, this leads to poorly designed, poorly implemented policies, a tendency to be caught by surprise and getting blowback from crises that develop that, just weren't being caught. We've already seen a lot of these things. Like, when we think about the immigration policy rollout, I have colleagues who are, fairly high up in DHS, Department of Homeland Security. They weren't even briefed about this before Trump just rolled it out. This is the sort of thing you see, and you see a lot of this behavior in foreign policy. Not really thinking through what is being done. So overall, what have we got? Because I'm running out of time here. Trump, in my view, has kind of the most dangerous combination of characteristics in a leadership style for a president. Certainly when you couple it with his total lack of any experience or expertise in foreign affairs. You could expect him to run into, to stumble into foreign policy crises because he doesn't recognize the situation, sort of inadvertently. This is certainly, I gave a talk on North Korean nuclear crisis the other day, and I was asked, well, what are you the most concerned about? My concern would be that we inadvertently stumble into something because he just doesn't recognize the situation. I think what you're going to see is extensive bureaucratic conflict in this administration as different departments and agencies fight it out because Trump is a delegator. And when you have presidents that are delegators, that just sprays lighter fluid on bureaucratic politics, closed information system, and basically the problem here also is that when you look at these profile characteristics, it's low complexity, high distrust, high need for control. What Margaret Herman and I have argued is that in crises, when there's high stress, whatever direction these traits go in, they get exacerbated. So that means if we get into a true crisis, yes, that's Trump's Twitter. He's heard this. So I guess I am wearing the red shirt after all. But in a crisis, if there's a lot of stress, we would expect Trump to become even more low complexity, to become even more distrustful. These are not positive things if we're looking ahead to a foreign policy crisis situation. So let me just stop there and move along to the next person on our away team. So.
Was that the mother of all briefings? I wish that the Donald would listen to you for 15 minutes.
He did, didn't you hear?
Yeah. But really, and perhaps ask you a question. No, that was absolutely great, Tom. Well, following in that order now, Melissa will make sense of the Donald Trump before, the Donald Trump after, and maybe it's all the same.
Well,
it's all very positive, very upbeat this morning.
Of course. Tom, thanks for a fascinating discussion. I have to say, as I'm sitting there, I'm just thinking about the striking contrast between Trump and his predecessor. So if the American people wanted change is certainly what they got. Good morning. My name is Melissa Willard-Foster. I'm a professor at the University of Vermont. It's great to be here, and thank you to our hosts for inviting me. I should begin with a little background here. When I received the email to come speak on Trump's foreign policy, I mentioned it to friends and colleagues, and usually the typical response was, what foreign policy? Is there one? Changes day to day, tweet by tweet. But this actually inspired the direction of my talk today because I was curious. Well, we have this conception that Trump has flip-flopped tremendously on foreign policy, his foreign policy views, especially compared, if we look at what he said during the election compared to what we're seeing right now. So I was curious, is this true? What do we see here? So I'll be speaking on candidate Trump versus President Trump, foreign policy promises and decisions. But I thought I might begin with a little background first. So let's see if we can get this going here. Point? Ah, there we go. Thank you. No? There we go. All right. Do politicians keep their promises? So what does the academic research say on this? Whoops. Now I couldn't click first, and now I'm over-clicking. Here we go. There we go. So surprisingly, if we take a look at the academic literature on this, one of the surprising findings is, in fact, actually, yes, there is a great deal of convergence between foreign policy promises and actual foreign policy decisions. Contrary to public opinion. Public opinion polls show pretty clearly that voters don't think that presidents keep their promises. But if we look at the record, it suggests that they at least try their very best. So I can't take credit for this beautiful graphic. This actually was in 538, I think last April, and it's a compilation of literature on this subject that was done in a study that came out in 2009. So if we can see the year of publication, the time period studied, but if you look at the share of promises kept, and this usually tends to include partially fulfilled promises as well as completely fulfilled promises, you can see it's upwards of 50% for most time periods that have been examined. One issue with this work here, though, is that it doesn't actually separate out necessarily. Some of these studies do, but many don't, domestic from foreign policy. So if we just take a look at foreign policy promises, are these any different from domestic political promises? One of these studies by Pomper, hold on, here we go. I think I'm clicking. There we go. All right. So if you see foreign policy up here at the very top corner, again, This is fulfillment of platform pledges by policy topics, foreign policy, whether or not we're talking about Democrats, Republicans, bipartisan pledges, if it's the party that's in power, the party that's out of power. By and large, you see pretty much presidents do or parties do attempt to fulfill the platform they promise. So, I'm trying to click again, clicking. There. So yes, but this is not what voters think. So a couple of things to keep in mind when we look at this research here. This is Santa Claus Clinton. Oh, sure, you brought peace and prosperity, but how about eternal youth and a cure for baldness? These are expectations of voters are pretty high. But something to keep in mind when we look at the data is it doesn't necessarily separate out high-impact policy pledges from low-impact policy pledges. So promises, for example, to improve relations with such and such country may be different from policy promises not to engage in nation building and then embarking on perhaps the largest nation-building enterprise since World War II. So we have a difference between high and low impact. This may surprise you, but politicians are not always very specific in their pledges. There is some degree of specificity that we can look at, but there are some promises that are very vague. What counts as an unfulfilled promise? Sometimes this is a little bit unclear as well. Is a policy that's been blocked by Congress, would we qualify that as an unfulfilled promise? What if the president has strategically kicked the decision over to Congress so that knowing that it will be blocked, is that unfulfilled? We might say yes. And then finally, how can we determine effort? Again, if the president makes a promise to improve trade relations with such and such a country, what kind of policy specifically would qualify as an effort towards fulfilling that promise? So with those caveats in mind, let's now take a look. There we go. Yeah. There we go. It takes a few clicks, but we'll get there. How do Trump's words and deeds match up? All right, so I'm taking a look at Trump's words and deeds with respect to rivals, allies, and enemies. We'll start with the rivals. So take a look at policy statements on China and Russia. As I'm sure many of you know, during their campaign, Trump was very bullish on China with lots of harsh rhetoric, qualifying it as an economic enemy, saying we can't continue to allow China to rape our country, and that's what they're doing, again, in terms of economic trade policy. On Russia, he had a remarkably different tone. We might speculate as to why. He promised we're going to have a great relationship with Putin and Russia. So what have we seen in terms of deeds? Well, let's take a look first at full or partial actions taken to fulfilling these promises. With respect to China, he has initiated trade investigations on Chinese steel and aluminum imports and alleged theft of U.S. property rights. He has pushed China to sign on to expanded sanctions on North Korea. So we might put these under sort of a positive action category. But in this, oops, I click and then there we go. Yeah? There we go. All right. But in this respect, we see sort of the largest reversal. So either no action or contradictory action. He's softened his rhetoric, especially on China and Russia. He's been noticeably more silent. With respect to China and North Korea, after meeting with Xi Jinping, he announced that now he understood that China had a very difficult time controlling North Korea, and I think it's worth quoting something he said here is, after listening for 10 minutes, this is in a discussion with Xi Jinping after their Mar-a-Lago visit, I realized it's not so easy, that is, for China to be able to rein in North Korea. I felt pretty strongly that they had a tremendous power, but it's not what you think. So, taking policy advice from the Chinese premier, he did not label China a currency manipulator as he promised. He did it about face on the One China policy, initially calling it into question shortly after taking office, but then reaffirming it roughly 3 weeks later. He withdrew from the TPP. I'll talk about this a little bit later. Again, why is this under no action or contradictory action? Well, many analysts regard the TPP as, which excluded China, as a way for the United States to solidify its alliances in the region and balance against China, sort of assert its influence in the region. So if he was going to be bullish on China and sort of follow through with the rhetoric of the campaign, one might have expected him to stick with the TPP. With respect to Russia, we've seen again a reversal in terms of signing on to Congress's Russia sanctions bill. Now, this was reluctant. Noticeably reluctant, he made that clear, but it was something he was pretty much compelled to do. He's also carried through with Obama's plans to bolster troops in the Baltics, and has not really taken steps to sort of undermine NATO in that regard, which is something Russia has a high degree of concern with. Okay, moving on. What about our relations with enemies? Yeah, which enemies? On the Iran nuclear deal, Trump during the campaign spoke very harshly of the deal, talked about ripping it up. Then he kind of switched during the campaign to say, well, no, I never said I was going to rip it up, but I'm going to police that contract so tough that they don't have a chance. So implying that he would enforce it in a way that it might actually end up leading to the end of the deal. For North Korea, with respect to Kim Jong-un, he called him a bad dude. But noticeably here, I thought this was very interesting. When I went back and looked at his rhetoric, he never said that he wouldn't speak to Kim Jong-un, which is something Obama was not doing. He said quite specifically, I would have no problem speaking to him. On Syria, he said, and I quote, we should stay the hell out of Syria. He didn't talk a lot about specifics on Syria. When he talked about Syria during the campaign, it was usually in reference to the refugee crisis. He did talk about establishing safe zones for refugees and tasking his generals, giving them 30 days with coming up with a new plan to defeat ISIS. So what have we seen in terms of deeds? Full or partial action. He did recently decertify the Iran nuclear deal. Now, this is very different from ripping up the agreement or pulling out of it entirely. This is, again, flipping it over to Congress, tasking them to come up with a better deal. It remains to be seen here what's going to happen. It's very unlikely our allies will be, in fact, they've stated quite clearly that they're not interested in renegotiating the deal, as has Iran. Trump has pledged that if there is no renegotiation, the deal will fall apart. This is something we'll just have to wait and see. He has worked to expand sanctions on North Korea, but at the same time, just recently, in fact, during the recent Asia trip in Seoul, indicated that he was still open to talking to Kim Jong-un, so calling for negotiations. With respect to Syria, he did end CIA support for Syrian rebels, but has not cut the Pentagon's Pentagon's budget, rather, in terms of funding U.S. allies in the region, especially the Kurdish Peshmerga, in fighting and defeating ISIS. Where do we see no or contradictory action? For the most notable here are the cruise missile strikes on Syria that came in the wake of another major chemical weapons attack in Syria by the Syrian government. He's been noticeably unclear on regime change, with his UN ambassador Nikki Haley at times indicating that the United States was still going to pursue regime change in Syria. Rex Tillerson sometimes saying just the opposite. So it's been a little bit unclear what the U.S. policy is with respect to Bashar al-Assad's regime. No safe zones for Syrian refugees, and really no major change in the approach to ISIS. I mean, what he's been doing is pretty much a continuation of the Obama-era policy. And finally, relations with our allies. If we look at words with respect to Europe, Canada, Mexico, well, he called into question NATO, called it obsolete during the campaign, questioned NATO's Article 5 commitment, which would compel the United States to defend its allies in the event of an attack, indicated he would consider whether or not the United States would act based on how much allies were paying. Certainly tough talk on NAFTA. Mentioned he would, discussed renegotiating it, but certainly the rhetoric suggested a very harsh renegotiation in favor of the United States. And of course, we have the infamous border wall that he is pursuing. And with respect to Asia, talked about ripping up the TPP. Again, it's quite striking the number of times he's referred to things in terms of sexual violence, but it's a rape of our country is how he described the TPP. Wants more defense spending from allies, Japan and South Korea. And with respect to Afghanistan, this I found very interesting. Despite being very critical of nation building, he indicated, I think you have to stay in Afghanistan for a while because of the fact that you're right next to Pakistan. So again, here if we look at full or partial action, yes, he scrapped the TPP. We could include the Paris Climate Change Agreement as well, something that has angered U.S. allies to no end, and many others as well. He is pretty much staying the course in Afghanistan, as indicated a troop increase of roughly 4,000 perhaps. So this actually does kind of fit with what he said earlier during the campaign on Afghanistan, and of course has also developed prototypes for the border wall, indicating that that will proceed apace. I put renegotiating NAFTA under neutral action because many analysts agree that NAFTA does need to be renegotiated, needs to be updated. What's interesting, and I'll let I think there's going to be a discussion of TPP later on. NAFTA later on, is that some of the updating going on is being borrowed from the language for TPP. So that's interesting. No or contradictory action. He claims that now he realizes later NATO is no longer obsolete and has indicated support for Article 5. So what do we make of all this? What's the bottom line? If I can, there we go. What's the score? Is Trump living up to his promises or not? How would he compare to those? How would he show on those earlier studies that indicate presidents largely try to keep to their promises? I think you could make a fair argument, for good or ill, that Trump is in fact trying to carry out some of his foreign policies, especially with respect to breaking international agreements and pushing immigration. But we've also seen some major reversals, and these are not necessarily reversals he wants to make. Some of them have been somewhat foisted upon him by circumstances. Russia, for example, the cooling relations with Russia. I think China is a different story. U.S. engagement in Syria, the airstrikes, this was a very noticeable reversal from his claim that we should stay out of Syria. Defense commitments to NATO, to Japan, to South Korea. He has sort of restated U.S. commitment to our allies, which is somewhat reassuring, but not necessarily enough for U.S. allies. So is there a strategy here? Trump is famous for claiming that his strategy is unpredictability. He likes to keep the rest of the world on its toes, keep them guessing. And this he regards, somewhat akin to Nixon's famous Mad Men theory, that this is really where you get the greatest leverage by keeping others guessing about where you're going to go. Interesting. Another sort of reading of what's going on here is that what we're seeing is infighting within the Trump administration, and I think this is sort of overlaps a bit with what Tom mentioned, that really it depends on who has his ear at the time. So as the nationalists and the nativists have left, Bannon and Gorka, and sort of the globalists have at least temporarily perhaps taken the helm, McMaster and Mattis, we've seen a return to reassuring our allies, engaging in Afghanistan, and this could explain some of the flip-flopping. And interestingly, Trump's reactions to some of these policies have been leaked. There's been a lot of upset and a lot of fighting, lashing out from him about having to go against some of his policy promises. Lastly, and I'll finish up here, if I can get that clicking. There we go. Can you get that back for me? Consequences. I'll start talking and you can read it when it comes back. The consequences. Can you click through for me? Thank you. With consequences. Dan Nixon has written a little bit about this with respect to Trump's madman theory, Nixon's madman theory, that you can gain leverage by keeping your opponents on their toes and making it unclear what way you're going to go. In fact, what we know about coercive bargaining is it works best when you are, in fact, not unpredictable, but rather very predictable, when it's very clear how you will respond to your enemy's transgressions, when there is no doubt in your enemy's mind that if they cross such and such a line, you will respond. So, in fact, unpredictability does not necessarily give one an edge when it comes to coercive bargaining. Something else we might want to consider is Trump's nationalist, America First foreign policy. One consequence of this policy is that the United States is going to increasingly see itself left out of international discussions. And given what we know of Trump's personality, it's curious, we might ask, to what extent will he be able to stand that the United States is no longer considered a world leader? Is that something that would fit with his personality profile, that he could accept that? And will that affect the foreign policy we see going forward, if in fact that is something he cannot accept? But I thought, lastly, we might end on just a slightly positive note. It's the Pollyanna in me, I can't help it. We might say that reversals in some extent may be good, but what might be interesting here is one could argue that with Trump's rhetoric, what he's doing is establishing a reputation, I use quotes, reputation, for toughness. And that, if we consider the argument that it takes a Nixon to go to China, that it takes somebody with sort of a credible reputation for being a hawk, for being conservative, somebody with these credentials that you wouldn't necessarily expect them to engage in peace negotiations, that these in some ways can be the kind of actors that can make the most gains when it comes to peace negotiations, because they have this credibility, this reputation that they will not be taken advantage of. But I say some of that optimistically, especially as events develop. We will see where we go with that. So thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Melissa, for that either encouraging, discouraging, but very, very, very meticulously done checklist on Trump. On to Ralph, and the other big party in all this is the Congress, and see what the Congress can do about it.
Well, first, I'd like to thank, is this working? Can you hear me? Okay. I'd like to thank Charles-Philippe for inviting us. I'd like to thank Frederick for organizing this, all the folks at the Raoul-Dandurand Chaire for all their hard work. They make this very easy on us to come in and do this, and not everybody does. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
That sums it up.
The last time I was here, he had me talk about George W. Bush, and that was hard for me as a Texan. So, okay. Okay.
Little did you know that was going to be easier.
Oh, God, do we love W.
Okay. I'm sorry? Okay. Good. Here we go. Congress and the President. Every president, every administration I've studied, at least since Eisenhower's, has gotten frustrated with the Congress over foreign policy. Ronald Reagan famously once pounded his desk and told Republican congressional leaders, "We've got to get where we can bring foreign policy and go with foreign policy without a committee of 535 telling us what to do." There's going to be tension. It's inevitable. It's built into the system. And so we've got Donald Trump, and we've got Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan, the congressional leaders, and they are natural allies, but they're also natural adversaries. We've got issues here. We've got serious issues here. It's built into the system. The president has a lot of foreign policy power, and my undergraduates think the president makes foreign policy. Maybe, and maybe not. Because the president is the commander-in-chief by the Constitution. This president's commander-in-tweet, but the president is also the chief diplomat. He alone controls diplomatic recognition of other countries. He is the chief executive of the administration, so he does administer. He can give executive orders and directives to others in the administration, and he has the bully pulpit of being the only person really who can speak for the entire nation. On the other hand, Congress has the power to declare war. More importantly, on a day-by-day basis, Congress has the power to authorize how funds are spent. Follow the money. Congress then appropriates the money. And you can't do anything in government without money. Congress gets to approve treaties. Even when the president makes executive agreements that don't have to be approved by Congress, often they require implementing legislation that does have to be approved by Congress. Oh, by the way, that includes trade deals. And finally, Congress has the right to oversee the actions of the executive branch. You'd think when you've got all Republicans or all Democrats in control of both of these chambers, that would ease things, but it really doesn't. Presidents will always want Congress to follow their lead. They will expect support from Congress. On the other hand, members of Congress will jealously guard their constitutional and institutional prerogatives. They don't want presidents encroaching on their turf. Jimmy Carter had a real problem with this when he was president. He had campaigned as a Washington outsider. He had offended many in Congress with his presumption that the congressional establishment was part of the problem and he was the solution. So members of Congress pushed back against against the president of their own party. Does this begin to sound familiar? Top-down leadership is hard to do with Congress. It's hard to do for members of Congress who are officially the leaders of Congress. It's really hard to do if you're the president. Okay. We got a problem here. At least Jimmy Carter had come into office having served in the Navy, having served as a state legislator and a governor of Georgia. As has been mentioned, Trump is the first American president ever to have not served in the military nor served in public service in any way. His resume is very different than any other president. He is the owner of the Trump Organization, which means he is the leader of a real estate development and branding enterprise that's composed of about 500 different companies, of which he is the sole or principal owner. Due to his sole or principal ownership, the Trump Organization essentially runs like a small business, a family business. It has about a dozen employees. That's his executive experience. But the thing that alarmed me as an analyst looking at this from outside before he was elected was his business experience is such that he has never had someone in his organization who can tell him no. He was not the CEO of a Fortune 500 company where the CEO had to report to the board of directors. He reported to no one. His decisions were final. He had no one to tell him no. His business approach is transactional. A deal's a deal. But those transactions in his past didn't always work out. He declared bankruptcy 4 times, leaving other partners in the lurch, not paying his bills. When you go deal to deal, you can walk away from a bad deal. You can find new partners in a development deal or a branding opportunity. He didn't have to go back to the partners he had scorched before. He has to go back to Congress over and over and over again. that is going to matter. Congress can tell him no. They can provide, the members of Congress can provide the authorizations and funding he wants, or they can deny it. They're accountable to their constituents, not to him. And they have egos and memories. Finally, he has, as we've said, a combative personal style. He's attacked many people in Congress. He attacks people when they don't agree with him. He's attacked the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, who also is a senior member of the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee. That's John McCain. He's attacked the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. That's Bob Corker. He's attacked the chairman, or another member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. That's Jeff Flake. He has also criticized the leaders of both chambers of Congress, Mitch McConnell in the Senate and Paul Ryan in the House. He has gone after the Senate Intelligence Committee and Senate Appropriations Committee, the chair of the Senate, a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee and the Senate Appropriations Committee, Susan Collins. He's gone after another member of the Senate Appropriations Committee, Lisa Murkowski. And he's gone after a member in the House of the House Armed Services Committee, Mike Kaufman. My point here is he's offending the very people whose support he needs in foreign policy, the people who control the votes on foreign affairs and armed services and national security matters. More to the point, I can do math. He has a 2-seat majority in the Senate. If you assume most Democrats might disagree with whatever President Trump wants, he really, really needs the support of every Republican in the Senate. And he's already offended more than 3 senators. So we have issues here. He's all about winning. But how's he doing? Okay, let's talk with the losses first. I'm getting into what Melissa talked about a little bit. On the Russian sanctions deal, he was presented that by Congress with such an overwhelming vote in support of it, he had no choice but to sign it or his veto would be overridden and he wouldn't win. So that's a loss. He thinks the Russian meddling thing obviously is a fake news story, that it's nothing, but he can't get Congress to stop investigating it. Aside from whatever Special Counsel Robert Mueller is doing, the Senate Intelligence Committee, let me make sure my notes are here, all right. Senate Intelligence, Senate Judiciary, and House Oversight are all investigating Russian meddling in the election, and that keeps this issue alive, and it continues to embarrass him. The NATO commitment reversal. Congress made it clear that we have a defense treaty with other NATO members, and we will come to their defense if needed per Article 5 of NATO. On Persian Gulf states, Senator Corker, the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, who President Trump referred to as Little Bob Corker, announced he would block any arms sales to Persian Gulf states until they stopped their economic blockade of Qatar in the Persian Gulf. And President Trump is endorsing their blockade of Qatar because it's what the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia wants. Afghanistan. Senator McCain demanded that the Trump administration present Congress a written strategy for what the heck we're doing there. And said that if he didn't present a strategy for what the United States is trying to accomplish militarily in Afghanistan, he, John McCain, and his members of the committee would write one and put it in the authorization bill that funds the Defense Department. So that's a challenge. Also, there's a 14% cut in State Department spending. Oh, I got ahead of myself. I'm sorry. This is fine. You're good. You're good. Use of force authorizations. We have a really old use of force authorization passed right after 9/11. And we've used that to combat terrorism ever since. Many members of Congress think that needs to be revisited to determine what we're doing regarding terrorism on a global basis and what should be authorized by Congress. President Trump does not want that done. Bob Corker, again, has said, oh, we're going to do that in the committee. We're going to review the use of force authorization, and we might go back and review the War Powers Resolution as well, which asserts the right of Congress to make these kinds of decisions. On NAFTA, yes, the president can sort of unsign a treaty. There's a way for the United States to get out of a treaty. Every treaty has some sort of escape clause. But NAFTA's a trade deal that required congressional authorization for the implementing legislation, and those are federal laws that have already passed. So if President Trump unsigns NAFTA in some fashion, those federal laws are still in place. In my view, the NAFTA agreements would still be in place until either Congress passed a new law changing it or a court said it was unconstitutional. On the border wall, obviously President Trump wants this badly. The House has approved $1.6 billion for initial construction funding. As far as I can tell, the Senate has not yet voted on that figure. And that's important because estimates vary so widely regarding what this is going to cost. The lowest estimate was by President Trump when he was a campaigner. He said, I think $4 billion. Some congressional Democrats say it's likely to cost more, something in the area of $60 billion, depending on how much is fenced and the topography of the land being cut. And then State Department funds, which President Trump wants to cut, he's already proposed cutting them 14%. Secretary Tillerson has proposed cutting them even more. Bob Corker has said, no, we're going to restore some of that money because that's important. He does have one likely win. Seriously, two Democratic legislators, Edward Markey from Massachusetts and Ted Lieu from California, introduced a bill that said the president can't fire nuclear missiles preemptively without Congress's approval. Well, I don't think that's going to pass. I think the whole issue of using nuclear weapons in a preemptive fashion, if you follow what preemption really means, you only attack first if there is an imminent threat. Well, Congress is a slow organization. It was meant to be slow. It was meant to be deliberative. I don't think I want Congress deliberating about whether I need to be protected from a nuclear attack. So I think President Trump will win on that one. Okay, conclusions. It's hard to imagine a greater mismatch between Trump's experience, his interpersonal style, his approach to foreign policy. It's hard to imagine a greater mismatch between that and what historically it has taken to be successful with Congress. So this is not looking pretty at this point. To quote little Bob Corker, the president has not yet been able to demonstrate the stability nor the competence that he needs to demonstrate in order to be successful. So what's he saying? He's suggesting the president is unstable and incompetent. He is saying things others in Congress are saying privately. But they're afraid to say it because they have to run for re-election. He is not running for re-election. He had previously vowed he would term limit himself and he's honoring that vow, so he's stepping aside. Now, President Bush is saying, well, that's because he couldn't get reelected. Well, that's an open question. We don't know if he could be reelected or not. But the point is, he has the freedom to say things that others are saying privately. Why do Republicans who don't trust him keep supporting him? It's because they want their domestic agenda passed. They wanted the Affordable Care Act, better known as Obamacare. They wanted it repealed and replaced, and that failed. Now they want a major tax cut. The House has approved a version of the tax cut, and Republican senators have said this tax cut is stupid. It's not what we promised the American people. It really is going to the super rich, and it doesn't really offer much tax relief to the middle class. It really isn't a tax cut for all Americans as we promised during the campaign. So he's got issues there, which has everybody's eyes on the 2018 midterm elections. We saw, is it 2 days ago now? Is this Thursday? We saw 2 days ago that a Republican governorship in Virginia went to the Democrats. We saw that a Republican governorship in New Jersey went to the Democrats. The Democrats are hoping that this is a harbinger of a massive Democratic swing in the pendulum of public voting in 2018. And any good political scientist studying American politics will tell you that the president's party almost always loses seats in the years when the president is not on the ballot. He only has a 2-seat majority in the Senate. He can't afford to lose much. He only has a 23-seat majority in the House. He can't afford to lose much. And he's alienating the people whose support he needs by his approach, style, and demeanor. Finally, there's Bob Mueller. Special counsel's hanging out there, and he's already brought 3 indictments. Yep. There are almost certainly likely to be more. There are numerous but unconfirmed reports, that there are already sealed indictments against Trump and the Trump Organization and the Republican Party for money laundering on the part of Russia. That takes my breath away, to be honest. But it's out there being widely reported on by many. I think that in the 2018 elections, it's very possible, if the Democrats win control of the House, that President Trump will be impeached, just like Bill Clinton was. But just like Bill Clinton, it will take a Senate conviction to force him from office, and I don't know if that's going to happen. But if he thinks dealing with a Republican-controlled Congress is difficult, wait till the Democrats are in charge, and that might happen this time next year. Thank you very much.
Wow. Wow. What a finale with Ralph. You really rocked off our seats. Ralph, a point of, I'll do like a congressional senator asking you a pointed question, technical question. Are you saying that you think, and where do you get your source, that there's a sealed indictment of Donald Trump, the president, or Donald Trump, the son?
The president and the son.
If there's any media here, you've got major news, breaking news. This is Wolf Blitzer in the Situation Room.
Unconfirmed reports.
Yeah, right. Oof. That's another, well, I'll leave it at that. That's another level of
fun times
of inquiry. Wow. Okay. I conclude, I don't know if you did, first that certainly Ralph and Tom, or Tom and Ralph in order of succession, agree that the word to sum up the dysfunctionality right now of American foreign policy is Would you agree? Mismatch. That's the word that I think is the key word from both your presentations. And with Melissa, we're left wondering if we should be reassured or very, very concerned that he is, in fact, following slightly more than perhaps we expected his promises, but we have a lot of question marks and unknowns.
Too soon to tell.
Too soon to tell. And maybe your list and Ralph's list sometimes are not in agreement, but I think that what they reflect is Melissa is presenting from, say, an analysis of Trump's viewpoint, have things evolved my way or not my way, and Ralph, of course, is evaluating this, I think, from a more outsider, analytical, academic perspective and saying, well, I think it's a success or I think it's a failure. So, in fact, I think both are right. Anyways, wow, we could talk a lot about all this. Thank you very, very much. This is a very extraordinary assessment. I would suggest to Frédéric, he's going to hate me for saying this. He's probably going, that we do Trump 1, Trump 2, Trump 3, if we get there, Trump 4, alive, and evaluate how much things are changing every year, and following up with you the sort of checklist of the Trump's presidency. Well, I take this as my own viewpoint. I have zillions of questions, but this is not my turn, it's your turn, c'est votre tour. Si vous voulez poser vos questions en français, il n'y a aucun problème. Frédéric et moi, on va tout traduire ça. Or you can ask in English, maybe even in Espanol, no sé. Why don't you go ahead? Présentez-vous, c'est sympathique pour nos conférenciers de savoir à qui ils ont affaire. Ça ne veut pas dire de présenter votre vie, ça veut juste dire où étudiez-vous et à quel niveau, s'il vous plaît. Alors, Greg Robinson, our distinguished professor of history and colleague from the Department of History at this university. So you don't have to present yourself, I did it for you. Greg.
My question is for Melissa Willard-Foster, but really for all three of you. Among the promises that candidate Trump made, as most importantly, was to make Mexico pay for the wall.
Oh, yes.
And it strikes me that it's rather like Nixon's secret plan to end the war in Vietnam, or Kennedy's missile gap, or Clinton's promise to end support for China.
Yeah.
So the question for you is whether there is, in all of these presidents, a major promise that is made for the campaign and then is quickly abandoned, and whether Trump fits this pattern. And then, more generally, how this fits in with discussing Trump's foreign policy, the question of Mexico.
Question to Melissa.
Well, thank you so much for that question. What's interesting is when I first started thinking about this problem, my gut feeling was that actually when it comes to foreign policy, there's a lot less fulfillment than we might actually think. And a lot of that has to do not necessarily with what the candidate wants. You know, the candidate's views may remain the same, but they encounter obstacles that they don't anticipate, or they're sort of led astray by crises that they have to confront, and so they end up having to forsake policy agendas that they thought they might pursue, or even in some instances they're confronted with circumstances that they just have to do a complete about-face. And so we're certainly seeing that to some extent with Trump on some major foreign policy issues. Syria, for one. The warming of relations with China, which is necessary in part to handle North Korea, and the cooling of relations with Russia. But in terms of past presidents, we've seen it as well. So, you know, we can think of Johnson's promises to end the war, and then, you know, taking office and immediately overseeing a rapid increase in troop deployments to Vietnam. We could think of, you know, Carter's promises to conduct a foreign policy based on human rights, which initially, you know, does last for a couple of years, but he's ultimately, towards the end of his term, is forced to rewrite considerably or reconsider considerably. So I think there's a number of examples where we do see foreign policy reversals. And so this is a question I'm really interested in exploring some more, because when we look at, you know, the data that's up there, some of that is sort of equating low-impact policies with high-impact policies. So I think it's really important to sort of dissect that, okay? When it comes to high-impact policies, arguably that's what we care about. when you have a candidate like George W. Bush who is bashing nation building, saying something we shouldn't do, and then takes office and embarks on one of the largest nation building efforts since World War II, you know, that is a major policy reversal. So my gut is that we actually do see a lot, and we see a lot more as, you know, towards the latter part of the tenure. But I will turn to my colleagues here for their comments as well.
I want to speak about the Mexico part of your question. My understanding of Mexican nationalism is that there is a heavy anti-American or stand-up to, you know, the Northern Colossus theme in Mexican nationalism. I guess dating back to the secession of Texas and the Mexican-American War. There is no way the Mexican president can agree to pay for a wall. I mean, oh my God. The narco-traficantes would get him if nobody else. But that's politically a non-starter. The only way President Trump could find a way to say Mexico paid for it was if he imposed some sort of sanctions on Mexico and said the monies there somehow offset the wall, but there's no way the Mexicans are going to pay for that wall.
You know, I think in some respects, it's when you think about how committed is a president to actually fulfilling a promise, on a campaign promise, and I think Trump is not really that task-oriented. He's much more interested in winning, and it's all about Donald Trump. It isn't about, so I think he has an unusual degree of flexibility as far as whether he is really committed. You know, some of these past other presidents actually probably believed in the details of some of these promises. I mean, Trump just kind of adopts policy ideas that come from other places, and he uses them if they're useful to him, and he moves away from them when they're not. And he will repackage things, however, as long as he is perceived as winning. So you look at the healthcare debate. I mean, he just kind of let Congress take the lead, and then he would literally contradict himself from one day to the next about what he was supporting. It's because he's not leading; he's just following. He's just wanting. And it goes back to his style. As Ralph pointed out, you know, it's labeling. I mean, that's his expertise. You know, so if I can just put my Trump name on this, if it's a win, then I've done bigly. And that's really the difference.
And Melissa is right about Afghanistan. Now, Trump even himself, you know, believes that nation building, after all, as a matter of fact, maybe not such a bad idea. Increasing number of troops and so on. Would you believe that?
Question ici. Faites ça relativement court. Je vais donner la chance à tout le monde. Puis après ça, je retournerai de ce côté-là. Puis je prendrai peut-être 2 ou 3 questions d'un coup. Comme ça, on va pouvoir donner le maximum de temps.
Nicholas, nice to meet you. Thank you for your presentations. Although alarming for an international relations student, my question is simple. Can you re-explain the link, the way that Congress controls the use of nuclear weapons by the president? Can you just develop that, please?
Yeah, it doesn't.
Interesting.
Congress doesn't control that. That is the president's prerogative as commander-in-chief. Obviously, when we're talking about weapons of mass destruction that can fly across the world in 30 minutes, there's not time for deliberative action. So I would assert that the legislation that was introduced by those 2 Democratic senators to try to rein in the president's preemptive use of nuclear weapons is at best impractical and at worst stupid, in my view.
Can I indulge in a quick 2-3 seconds rejoinder? I think that Corker wants to know actually who is around Donald Trump that could have authority to sort of not certify or not authorize his the nuclear codes that he could use to alone, in the fictitious world of nuclear weapons, authorize the use of nuclear weapons. I think we have an issue here is, what if we have a very irrational president that gets very angry in the morning, becomes, the Incredible Hulk, and pushes the red button because he's got the codes? Who actually around him, like Kelly, like McMaster, like maybe even Mattis, would
take upon himself or themselves to say to the chain of command, I'm thinking of the old book by Blair and Bracken about nuclear command and control, would say, whoa, let's calm down. We'll go back to the Donald and see, have you just ordered, a nuclear weapon use? I think that's what they're after. They're after what's going on there? What would happen in a scenario like that? I think I'm very concerned about that, to be honest.
I think you'd have to have Secretary of Defense Mattis
concur.
Remind the president that the military is not under any obligation to obey an order that it believes is illegal. So that's the one way that immediately occurs to me that the chain of command would not initiate the steps that would actually cause missiles to fire or bombers to take off with nuclear weapons.
But that presumes Mattis is actually in the room at the time.
Well, but the thing is, I know the nuclear weapon question is kind of the sexy, scary scenario, but I would say that as of great concern, a greater concern might be just his commander-in-chief power to order an airstrike or to do something like that. You think about North Korea, you could tip this into a full-blown military crisis by doing something silly. And even if Madison and McMaster and other people have told him not to do things before, and he's gone ahead and done it, and they say, yes, sir, it's civilian command of the military. So, the nuclear issue is one thing, but I think that where we're more likely to see a slip into a crisis because of his commander-in-chief powers is maybe something as innocuous as an airstrike.
Yeah.
So.
Ooh.
Frédéric Marcoux, Charles-Philippe student. I'm curious to know about the drones attack, like with Obama, they had a killing list. And what's the evolution on Trump's era, and what do you expect for the near future?
Okay. So we got that question. The infamous killing list. Does he still work on it? Does he have more power to use the killing list? With drones that Obama had every Tuesday that ordered strikes against, terrorists, either personally or as a gang, signature strikes, so on.
I mean, a list like that would be, not compiled by Trump anyway. That would be just something based upon intelligence and what targets were out there. So, one would assume that there is a list of certain individuals that would be, al-Baghdadi would no doubt be on that list. Mm-hmm. So, I think that, most certainly there would be some sort of a targeting list like that, but I think Trump, that isn't part of his one-page brief that he looks at in the morning and adds names to. So,
I think something interesting to consider is Obama's use of drone strikes was in part of reaction to his failure to close Guantanamo. So if you can't send those who you capture on the battlefield to Guantanamo, what do you do? And the drone strike policy was in a way a response to that. Let's not end up sending anybody to Guantanamo because we're killing them in those countries. So Trump is going to encounter the same issues. What do you do about Guantanamo, and how does that affect your drone policy? I think it remains to be seen still.
Mm-hmm. Let's go quickly with more questions. Vous avez attendu très longtemps. Je vais prendre vos 2 questions, puis ensuite je vais être de ce côté-là prendre les 3 dernières questions d'un coup. Donc, 1, d'un coup, ensuite 2, et puis après ça, on va finir malheureusement, parce qu'on passera la journée avec eux. Hein? Mais on passe la journée avec eux.
Hi, my name is Robert. I got that. I can see that Trump is insulting Republicans as well as Democrats, and he doesn't seem to mind who he's cutting bridges with and everything. But I have the feeling that the only thing he's keeping in mind is, I want to keep that 30 to 40% of a strong support I have, and that's not wavering. It doesn't seem to be wavering a lot. And impeachment and all that, I think maybe Trump's idea is bring it on, because I have a funny feeling that maybe what he's trying to do is succeed in something that nobody succeeded in doing in the last 100 years, is create a third party. Already Bannon is helping, I think he's putting candidates in districts for the next election. Is that true? So I think Bannon and him basically have a plan to really try to in the next votes, either for Congress or the presidency, have a third party with candidates everywhere, and with 35% of the votes, you can squeeze in between the two other parties. Is that a valuable thesis? Or?
All right. Good point, although my quick response would be, why create a third party when you've captured one?
Yeah.
But we'll see what they have to say. I'll take a second.
Yeah, I think that you're right about the unwavering support of his hardcore supporters, and anything he does, they endorse. I think rather than a third party, because the American electoral system with a winner-take-all structure gravitates historically always to two parties, and any third party that gets traction, one of the two major parties steals their ideas and issues. I think what you've described could happen, but instead of a third party, it would be the takeover of the Republican Party by the Trump wing of it, and that the Republican Party's nature over time, over the last 40 years, let's say, would fundamentally change to get that 35 or 36% of those voters who want to vote with Trump. That's my opinion.
On va vite. Prochaine question.
Hi, my name is Claude Giroux. I'm a retired person who's just trying to stay informed. I've got a question for Professor Preston. You've studied a lot of personality types of other leaders around the world, so my question is this. Who do you think is the best suited to deal with Trump right now? And who would be the least well suited to deal with that type of personality?
Well, I think Putin is obviously the best to deal with Trump. You can, for some reasons, potentially. Well, I think the challenge, when you're dealing with a leader like Trump, if you're another country, is that if you're trying to influence policy and you're trying to get a message through, you're trying to communicate, you have to turn the volume way up, because the signal has to be very, very strong, and to get past the fact that he has his antennae down. He is focused on Trump. He's focused on pre-existing views. His advisory system is not set up to gather broad information and advice. So if you're trying to communicate or signal the Trump administration, that is a challenge just in of itself, and that's aside from the fact that we haven't appointed ambassadors a lot of places, that the State Department, senior people at State Department haven't been appointed. I know colleagues at State Department that talk about, well, we've never even seen Tillerson. He's never there. I mean, and half the people we used to report to aren't there. So when you've got that sort of a situation, it's the communication issue becomes somewhat problematic. I think Trump, I think the word is getting around to foreign leaders is just praise him. Just say nice things about him. Just lavish him like the Saudis did, like the Chinese are doing today. You say those nice things, and Trump, if he was beating his chest, I'm going to be tough on them. Oh, you like me? Well, I like you too. And the thing that you don't do with Trump is you don't try him. You don't, because he's so thin-skinned and so prickly that if you're trying to be tough and I mean, the thing is, say nice things to him while he's there, and then be tough later when he's not there. I mean, that's the way to deal with him essentially. And I think the word has gotten around that Trump is so predictable in that sense. And actually, the thing with leaders with a profile like Trump, they are quite predictable. It's the ones that are highly complex, that see the shades of gray. I mean, they base their decision-making and their policy upon the actual context and details and nuance. Trump doesn't do that. I mean, if he's basically going to be behaving the same way most times, and you see this, how he's reacted to different foreign leaders. I mean, Putin says nice things about him. Oh, well, I like Putin. He's
but do you see anyone that has more success right now or that has potential to have more?
That's just how you would communicate with them.
Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They've got it down. They know how to handle a monarch. I'm not joking. King Salman and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman know how to deal with a guy like Trump. They threw a huge party for him. Huge. And he loved it. They had him dancing with men. It was just wonderful.
The globe. Globe.
Yes. So I think the Saudis have figured it out.
Good answer, Ralph. Both of you. And you've got also to be in good terms with Ivanka, I would add. I think that's a good way to get to daddy.
My name is Omar Mumtaz. I was just going to give the same comment, so I'll change my question. How did this first year change the personality of Donald Trump, the experience of the presidency? What effect had it had on him, if ever it had any effect?
I don't think it's had any effect. No effect.
Okay.
No effect.
Wow. So what you see is what you get, and you still get.
What you get. What you see is what you get.
Yeah. Oh boy. Melissa and Ralph, I suppose you agree?
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. Deux questions. Je vais regarder s'il me reste du temps pour vous.
Hi, my name is Megan Roy. I'm following Greg's Robinson class on United States foreign policy, and I was wondering, in case where Trump would actually be impeached, do you believe that Pence would be a better president in regard of international policy? Would he have to?
Oh, we might, keep that question for Trump year 2, huh? Why we don't? Do you want to answer that? What do you think? Well, we can take it.
What was Lindsey Graham's analogy during the campaign about the choice between being poisoned or shot?
Something like boy.
Well, I think Pence is more. Pence does take the PDB. He doesn't think he's too smart to take the briefs. Obviously Pence would be more stable. We wouldn't be having this conversation about, waking up in the middle of the night to push a tweet button and launching a nuke with Pence. Pence is much more structured. Yeah. I think you'd see much more just a traditional neoconservative type of foreign policy if you had somebody like Pence in. I think you would see a few more, experts of the American Enterprise Institute, Heritage Foundation type surrounding that administration. You probably wouldn't see as many Ben Carsons and people like that. So I think that would be the main difference. I think you'd have a more traditional hard right conservative president with Pence. Trump really isn't a Republican. So and that's one of the frustrations for the Republicans is that he's so flexible about what he believes and what ideology he really. It's really his ideology is Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. But if you went to Pence, it would be Republican, traditional hard right conservative ideology. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think Pence pretty much fits pretty well with the foreign policy establishment view that the United States is the indispensable nation, that it needs to take a leading role in foreign policy, sort of the neoconservative view that the United States should be out there promoting democracy by force if necessary. So I'm going to say something a little shocking because you asked about would it be a better foreign policy, and from a purely international relations theory perspective, I think fear is bad for the international system. It's destabilizing, and predictability can be a cause of fear, and that can be destabilizing. So the extent to which it could be a more predictable foreign policy, yes, it could potentially be more stabilizing. But there are some components of Trump's foreign policy platform that, from, again, an international relations theory perspective, make some sense. So, for example, demonizing Russia. There may be good reasons for us to be wary of Russia and to reconsider its reconsider its incentives, but you don't necessarily get a lot of advantage from demonizing it. In fact, it could provoke a security dilemma. So, foreign military intervention. There's lots of reasons to consider whether or not the United States should be as aggressive in promoting democracy as it has been. And what are the consequences of that? Again, going back to provoking a security dilemma. Could you be provoking other states and causing fear and insecurity by promoting U.S. Democracy abroad? Do other countries just interpret that as a bold attempt to spread U.S. power? So there are some components of Trump's foreign policy that actually make some sense, and that Pence probably would not pursue. So, needless to say, it's a complicated question that deserves a complicated answer.
You might be prophetic, huh?
Next year we'll say she asked the question.
Irasema, I'm so sorry. I'm running out of time, and my boss is checking on me, so I'm stressed out. Dernière question, rapidement, quickly, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay, well, thanks a lot for your lectures. Okay, so my question is, in which way Trump's foreign policy is a reinterpretation of manifest destiny? Open question.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Oof. Well, I'm glad I'm not answering.
Well, I mean, I think you see a lot of push on the Republican side for this emphasis upon American exceptionalism, and so I think to the extent that there's this manifest destiny notion, and I think it's really the modern Republican or conservative movement that emphasizes that exceptionalism. Trump talks a lot about that, but again, I think that the depth of his commitment to necessarily that is very fluid. I think his main concern is Trump.
I think I want to augment what Tom just said. I think to have a preference and a plan for something like manifest destiny, or to have, if you want to call it, a strategic approach to the world, whether it's American exceptionalism or manifest destiny or whatever, it means you've got to connect a lot of dots. Mm-hmm. And I don't see a lot of dot collecting in this administration. This transactional approach approaches each dot, each interaction, each iteration independently. And so we don't see connecting dots. We see potentially exploiting single dots. And so the idea of us having as structured an idea about what we want to be in the world as what your question suggests, I don't see that happening in this administration at this time.
It's just primarily big picture. It's like closets and you open up the door and there's no coats on the hooks.
Ooh, that's
There's no
scary.
details. There's no details. There's no depth. It's just broad brush rhetorical positions, but not a whole lot of detail.
Are you saying what a Texan would say? That
All
the president
hat, no
is
cattle?
all hat and no cattle?
That's exactly it. All hat and no cattle. All casinos and no non-bankrupt businesses.
Oh,
yeah.
Boy,
what would they say in Vermont?
They're a very Republican
All
state.
trees, no maple syrup? I don't know.
Well, we've got two major conclusions here about ranch and maple. Thank you so much. The most depressing topic, we almost feel upbeat. So, you really did a great,
Imagine
fantastic
taking
job.
our classes.
We'll all go down to Texas, to Vermont, and Washington State University, and we're going to follow your classes. Absolutely. On va prendre une pause et on revient dans... Oh, quel titulaire, hein? 12 minutes 32 secondes. Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much, all of you.
No, that was a lot of fun. It was really interesting.
We're going to do this every year.